This is Catherine Toon, and I have with me two amazing brothers who are doing amazing things. And so we have Paul Young, author of The Shack. We have Bradley Jersak, author of The More Christlike God. And you guys wrote so many other books. It's very hard to frame you, but you are theologians at heart and have so much to offer. And you have a brand new book out called, yes, oh, there you are. I got it on Kindle, so I will frame it. We'll do it. No, that's not working. We'll let you do yours. There it is. Available on Amazon, yes, called The Pastor. And yeah, so we're excited to talk about that and really whatever else you are wanting to talk about. So yeah, feel free. Why don't you introduce yourselves a little bit more, just in case someone on the off chance may not know about who you are, what you do, and we will dive in. So whoever wants
after you, Paul.
Paul Young. I'm married to Kim for now 41 years. And we have 6 children, 4 marrieds and 1 going to be married coming up in November. We have 12 grandchildren so far. And I live in the Pacific Northwest, where we've had lots of strange waters like everybody else. And we have a son who's a Portland police officer. We've had 6 immediate members of Kim's family test positive for COVID, and that got very serious, but they're all doing well. We had almost 2 weeks of firestorms and the worst air quality in the world for a while. And you know, so we have all this politics and we've got all this other stuff going on. And in the midst of this year, Bradley and I wrote a book together and released it. So that's sort of my world. I wrote The Shack, which is why most people know who I am, if you've either read the book or seen the movie. And as I tell everybody all the time, never intended to be a published author, wasn't on my bucket list. I made 15 copies at the photocopier at Office Depot, and it did everything I ever wanted that book to do. So all of this, I chalk it up to God's great sense of humor, or proof that he can still speak through Balaam's ass. I'm not sure, you know, I think the latter is probably more accurate. And so here we are.
We're really glad he took the ball from there. We're really glad about that, Paul.
You know, I had this conversation with God and I said, look, how come you didn't let somebody else write this like 30 years ago? It would have saved me like 30 years. Right. And it's like, nobody else could do it. And that's the uniqueness of who we are, right? And we each have a sound and a voice that the cosmos is waiting to hear. And that's the journey toward authenticity, so that the sound we make is ours. And then that joins this cosmic choir, you know, but it needs your uniqueness.
Love that. Beautiful. So Bradley?
Yeah, I also have a family, 3 sons, daughter-in-law, an ex-daughter-in-law, and a granddaughter, and all very precious to us. And vocationally, my wife and I had been pastors and church planters for 20 years. And then I had a big meltdown in 2008 and went to hide in a seminary, or a university really, where I did a PhD in theology, and it really addressed a lot of the intense issues of suffering that I had seen in my world and that led to my collapse. And then when I came out of that, I realized I don't want to be a pastor anymore ever again, please God. And was invited into the academic world. And I'm currently the Dean of Theology and Culture at a little university in New Brunswick called St. Stephen's University. And I'm a lecturer with the Institute of Religion, Peace and Justice, which is a wing of SSU as well. and I'm also trying to write. And so Paul very graciously became the bridge for me, united with me to collaborate in my first stab at fiction, in a way that he sort of was responsible to make sure that I wasn't bringing agenda and propaganda into the mix. And so what fun, because the whole thing was bathed in our friendship, which has, Paul will often say, it's just like so easy. It's not, we don't work at our relationship. God has given us one another as a wonderful gift. And this book was an expression of that, I think.
I agree. We both have pretty conservative histories as far as Western evangelical Christianity. I'm a missionary kid, preacher's kid, and firstborn on top of that. And so, you know, I have a lot of sensitivity and a great love for art of all sorts, whether it's music or theater or painting and sculpturing, or, you know, the whole gamut. I just am fed so deeply by art. And those two things combined, I have this real reticence about my people's inability to produce art. They end up almost invariably producing propaganda with an agenda. And as soon as you do that, the value of the art itself just dissipates. And anybody from outside the fold can smell it from a mile away. And they're like, no, I think I'll go try you two, or, you know, Neil Young, or, you know, Bruce Coburn or somebody, but no. And so I think that's part, and it's why I write the way that I do. And one of the greatest compliments to me when the Shack first became public was that somebody said, who knew me, and said, you know, I was just waiting for the shoe to drop. I was just waiting for you to end up with a Christian novel, you know. And what he meant was that it would turn into some form of propaganda or
kitsch,
you know, kitsch,
Right.
and
Kitsch.
and conversion kitsch, right?
Mhm.
yeah.
And he said it, and it didn't. And I think that's the piece that has really, because I think that if I had done that normal kitschy Christian thing, normal in the sense, I think it's abnormal, but in the sense that usually what happens right now in our subculture, that people would have just put it down, and it wouldn't have had the ripple effect into their hearts the way that it did, because it kept it open-ended, not closed.
Absolutely.
And
It's an agenda of love, right? But that's a
yeah,
universal
what is
language.
an agenda of love, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, an agenda of love is to seek the freedom of the other.
Not heavy-handed. We could do our own 1 Corinthians 13 here, right? That love is not heavy-handed. It seeks it makes space for authentic otherness. It leaves questions open-ended as invitation, all of that stuff. And I saw that in the Shack for sure. And well, really all of Paul's writings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Pauline
You have a
corpus.
lot of writings. So,
I'm
yes.
developing a corpus. But
Yeah.
usually that means you're dead, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Ain't
A
dead
body.
yet.
It's a body of work.
It's a body. It's a body. It's a happy
He's almost
body.
dead.
A living body.
You're not dead yet.
Half dead.
That's right. Life of Brian. Absolutely. All right. Well, so tell me what prompted the novella, The Pastor. I mean, you know, for those of you who haven't read it yet, it's one of those reads. I just want to warn you that it's a happy warning that will engross you, and you will not want to put it down until you've reached the end. And it's shorter, but it is so powerful, rather dark in the sense of going deep, right? So
A friend of mine said it's brutally beautiful.
Yes, exactly. Redemptive. Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that. Brutally beautiful. So yeah, and so it is very authentic, but just so redemptive, gorgeously so. And I love the fact that you guys didn't pull any punches. Clearly, to write something like that, you've had to have gone through some stuff. And I know from Paul, I know your testimony better. And then I know some of your testimony too, Brad, as well. And that's the beauty when you get in those places of darkness, and underneath it all, you find those everlasting arms of love, right? That are undergirding it and lifting you up and diving into your alienation and blah, 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 blah. So what prompted this particular work?
Over to you, Brad. Lee.
Yeah, I think it really, the genesis of it was stories that we've both experienced or encountered in others. And so I came up with a seed in terms of a plot line, and then Paul and I developed these really composite characters in relationship that unfold. And I think what makes it so authentic is that these are people we know in some way, right? Just as the shack was an authentic vision of Paul's own heart put to fiction to deliver truth, we're doing that again with this one, but it includes some real life stories of people we've walked with. In fact, some of the dialogues are directly transposed from encounters with Jesus, and also their deepest wounds.
And from text messages, and
Yeah, clearly. So it was kind of your kernel that you kind of started with, Bradley, and then you connected with Paul. I have an idea.
Yeah, and then Paul was able to really massage and reframe things when it needed it, in order to avoid the teacher being crass or whatever. And what we do is we'd send the manuscript back and forth. So it wasn't like we were alternating chapters. It was that we were alternating holding the manuscript. And along with the collaboration includes Paul and I, the people who became the characters, and also our editors who we trust deeply, and also Wes Yoder, who's the publisher behind the book, had a hand in it as well. And so we had really good discussions about, okay, is this going to be too much? Or is this, okay, we have to go raw here. Let's make sure it's not gratuitous.
Right.
And so on.
Right. Not gritty and raw for the sake of gritty and raw.
Correct.
We're raw for the sake of redemption. Yeah.
Right. We're not looking for shock value here, but we're looking for the reality of the arduous journey that some of us have to go through, the fire of the process. And there are a couple questions that underlies, I think, a lot of us, and that Bradley and I tried to address here. And one of them is there anyone who is irredeemable? And is there anyone who is beyond the ability of God to heal? Have they gotten to such a destroyed place? And our main character is a pastor, and it's the pastor, a crisis, and crisis is the Greek word krisis for judgment. And this is a judgment that all of us everybody gets salted with fire. And we must go through a process in which all of that which is not of love's kind is destroyed in us. And that means our idols, the things we hold that are to be precious that are actually not. It means all the false personas. It means actually facing and deal with our past and our history and what got us to where we are. So the pastor is a composite character. He's not Bradley and he's not me, although there are elements of our stories that are entwined here. But the specific kinds of losses that he experienced, the pastor experienced, are right from people we know. And so you have this hellfire damnation preacher who has an absolute meltdown and ends up in a psych ward. And that sort of frames the story from there. Yeah. So Bradley, talk about the response you got about from the woman who runs.
Sure. So So there's this woman who just read the book, and I sure hope I can find her notes here. And her issue is she had very severe childhood trauma, born to two addicts, passed around foster homes where, you know, the kind of stuff people go through there. And out of those wounds, a lot of like sort of self-harm kind of stuff. And oh dear, if I can find it. So anyway, what she said is this, she went into the book and I'm trying to remember if she heard the audio version too, which would take you even into a deeper encounter. But, you know, she read the book, and what she said was, I'm reading it, and she said, at first I'm going, oh no, you know, he's going to want to redeem this pastor.
And I hate him.
And I hate
Right.
him.
Right.
And then she said, and I did hate him. And then I loved him. And when I loved him, I thought, I've hated me too. I wonder if that love could happen for me as well. And Paul hasn't even heard all of what has happened since then. I mean, she's been using the book. She's been using the encounters from the book to as exercises in her own prayer life.
Exactly.
When she texted me that, she was halfway through a run that she was using, I think, as bulimia. You know, you don't throw up, you go run 26 miles because you ate 2 cookies, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Sure.
And so she's off on these runs and all that. Well, now what's happened is she would wake up in the middle of the night and immediately she's into self-hate and it's shifted now, so that immediately when she wakes up in the night, she looks and she sees the face of Jesus lying beside her night after night. And then one of our mutual friends had a big tumble and ended up in jail, and that was a betrayal to her. And she just said it opened up that fresh wound from this betrayal, revealed an old father wound that had never been healed. So she starts spiraling again, but because in the pastor, what happens is you have Jesus' eyes looking in your eyes, you have Jesus laying his wounded hand on us. Well, that's what she's been doing. She invited Jesus yesterday to lay his wound on her wound and to begin to draw the toxins out, both from the recent problem and from this old father thing. And she wanted to be so analytical with it. Well, he's looking at the wound. I'm like, he wants to lay his hand on it. Will you? And he wouldn't do it until she gave permission. And then when he did it, she's describing that. I'm like, no, what does it feel like? Oh, it feels like. So she was having to get from head into heart, right?
Exactly.
And so she's having a day by day
to live in her heart.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so even as of this morning, she's in an encounter with Christ that emerged out of reading the novel. So that's pretty wonderful.
So incredible. Yeah, I love the way it kind of in the process of kind of just reading this story and the encounters that are going on, it's an invitation to engage with Holy Spirit. And I feel like people can really take advantage of that. Let him peel back some areas that, you know, false personas, blah, 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 whatever those is, wounds that, because the Lord will just move through anything, but this is so anointed for this. And you even have like prayers that he was led into saying and all of that. Did you guys want to share any part of the process? I don't want to like reveal too much, but I just feel like there's so much value. It's not just a story. It's actually an encounter that you can partake in.
And I think that's a great compliment too. And I think it's true. Even the putting of trigger warnings was an act of kindness that wasn't meant to dissuade anybody.
Yeah.
It was part of the invitation.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the responses that we've already had from especially people who have been broken or people who have been judgmental about broken people.
Wow.
Has been enough for the reason to have written the book. And, but again, there are different characters. If you get a chance, listen to the audiobook, because it's done with 6 voice actors.
Yes.
And it's like theater of the mind, and it will lead you into a depth that reading oftentimes won't allow. And
it was so good. Yeah, because
oh my goodness.
I did the Kindle version.
Yeah.
And then on your suggestion, I went back and got the Audible book. Oh, just a whole nother layer. One of the things I appreciated too is because a lot of times when there are people that are narrating, you just have one person, usually a man, and when he gets to the female stuff, it just sounds like that's not how a woman sounds. so you really feel like you can engage in the encounter because there's a richness, and the actors, the voice actors, however you term that, just have such a command of it. You can just see Holy Spirit weaving through it. It's a performance, but it's also something to engage with. So yeah, that was great. I was so glad you recommended that. And yeah, excellent. Just wow, it's powerful.
Yeah, and those actors really, they were able to engage the characters because aspects of the characters touch their own hearts, right? And so you're hearing voices break authentically. You're hearing Boyd Barrett, who was the primary narrator and director of it, going through the struggle, the emotional struggle of even reading the book as one who steps into the character. But then here's the thing, right? You step into the character and that character walks you towards redemption.
Plummets. Yeah, it plummets and then is redeemed.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Oh, now there is a Jersak, right? Is that a relative?
Yes, my youngest son was one of the voice actors.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have two of my sons had done written work that appears in the book as well.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
So it's
like a poem, and
yeah. Dominic, who is the youngest son, is a significant character, and he's not a quote unquote voice actor, but let me tell you, he stepped into this role and just did a superb job.
It's on his resume now.
Yeah, it is. He's now a voice actor.
You must be a very proud dad. That's awesome. That's a dream to have your kids. That's a legacy that they've entered in that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and some of it's his own journey is reflected in the pastor too. In terms of, I can say that, he identifies as queer, and he has experienced sexual trauma, and for him to listen to it and to walk through it, I drove him from Vancouver to Winnipeg, and we listened in the car on the way there, and a few days afterwards, he got into a very deep discussion with my brother, and he's telling my brother, like, you need to listen to this. And I think it answers. So it was quite funny that he would now become an evangelist of the book in that sense. And he's one that's sort of like, okay, this is the shack meets Handmaid's Tale.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah, which I think is a brilliant insight and a great compliment.
Yeah.
Wow. Truly. Truly. Anything about your own personal journeys as kind of reflected or impacted or seen through in some way in this book that you want to share? Would that be something?
One analogy that I'll use is, for me, I had to go from, I think of it as the very, very first draft of the book was just going to be 3 pages long, a short story. Moving from clenched fists of self-will to limp wrists of despair to open hands of receptivity. That's my story. That's what happened to me in terms of what really came to a head in 2008. I faced a lot of tragedies of people in the church we had planted who addicts, people with disabilities, and so on. We had a murder, we had 3 suicides, we had an abduction, the kind of stuff when you're working with people on the margins, and it broke me. But it also meant my stuff came out and I started acting out. And it just was like a disaster. I was what do you say? I was a dumpster fire in a train wreck. So
I've heard that somewhere.
yeah.
Yes.
So what I had to do was I had to look at, I began working with a 12-step sponsor who, by the way, was the inspiration for Sage, one of our characters.
Oh,
And
yes.
what I came
She
to
was
see,
powerful. Yeah.
oh my goodness, what I came to see was I was crashing into my own self-will, my desire to alleviate pain through control. And and when life became so overwhelming, the grace of it was that I couldn't last long that way. Some people last a lifetime. I didn't have the soul strength, and I crashed hard quickly enough that it didn't linger forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from the clenched fist to the limp wrist, and then the question the book asks is, will you surrender to the care of a loving God? And in 12-step recovery, I found that their higher power is beautifully Christ-like, in that we would describe the higher power that we surrender to the care of a loving, forgiving, personal, relational, and responsive God. Well, that's Jesus in my world. So for me, the flashpoint was 2008, but you also see Paul's testimony, and like we said, others as well.
Yeah, my flashpoint was 1994. So I was ahead of Bradley by quite a bit, but I'm older than him, and you know, and that started an 11-year descent, really, of deconstruction and judgment in the best, most loving sense, right? It didn't feel like loving kindness at the time. It felt more like hell. And but you know, I look back on those 11 years and I would never want to go through that kind of a journey and process again.
Ooh,
facing the things that I had to face, necessarily had to face. But I'm every day grateful for it. It absolutely saved my life. And but you know, and most people know, or a lot of people know my story, and that, you know, missionary kid, preacher's kid, sexual abuse childhood, you know, raving father childhood, third culture kid issues with it not belonging or fitting anywhere, the resulting bullying and abuse in a culture as well as in boarding school, and you know, all of that. And you become a performance addict and you hold it all together. The shack represents the broken soul, mine, and you don't want to go back there because it holds all the stuff from which you have emerged, and so you deny its existence, and you become someone who creates a facade outside the shack and tries to perform their way into transformation. And it's like,
doesn't work.
There's this beautiful promise, again, you know, not to prop up 12-step recovery, but they have saved my life at some level, where they say in the promises at the end of every meeting, it's through these steps, and the steps mean surrendering your life. That's it, right? And being honest, being brutally honest. And it says that we came to a spiritual awakening after which we did not live in regret or like of the past or wish to shut the door on it. And I'm like, oh my goodness, my whole life was about regretting the past and doing everything I could to shut the door on it. And in the pastor, he uses his fundamentalism to do that.
Right.
And one of my spiritual father, Archbishop Lazar Pajalo, he says that moral outrage, which you see in the pastor, moral outrage is a form of confession for deeply repressed suffering souls, you know. And so, and I think as long as we want to shut the door on where we've come from and hold those things in the closet, we just absolutely suffer. But when we let Christ into the darkness, we find out, you know, what First John says is that the true light has come into the world, and the darkness is already fading away. And I'm like, I don't believe that a lot of days, but what John seems to know is that the light is winning.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, Archbishop Lazar, moral outrage is a form of confession for deeply repressed. Is that the word you used?
Yeah, and he would say deeply repressed passions, but by passions, he means, the passion of Christ, suffering, the suffering soul. And so in us is raging, and it's repressed in the sense that you may not know that you have this issue, but you can see it in, he told me this saying as we're watching these televangelists imploding. Well, he would tell me ahead of time, and he would see it that the ones who were most condemning, most morally outraged, and most haughty about it, he would say, oh yeah, I give that guy 6 months. I'm like, what do you mean? Till he blows up. He's ripe now. Why do you say that? Because moral outrage is a form of confession. 6 months to the month,
Bam,
boom, it's in the news. And now I don't use that as a way to judge others. I use it to ask myself, where am I morally outraged? And if I am I repressing something there? And I can give you an example. I get I got moral outrage against fundamentalism. What's that about? When I started looking at it, I realized I was like a ex-smoker who hated my past and had not come to peace with it. And I realized, when I come to peace, that these, like Paul, I love when Paul says, these are my people. My dad represents that, and I love him, and the world will not be better if he dies.
Yeah.
And maybe he gave me some gifts. And so suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, now the moral outrage has calmed down. Because I've come to peace with my past, and I have no regrets or self-hatred that I was a Baptist fundamentalist. It's part of my story, without which I'd not be sitting here today.
Yep.
And the thing is, there's beauty that you can go back in that past now that it's been healed. Your heart's been healed of it, and you can really see the treasure, because it wasn't all.
Oh, absolutely. So I can say things like, my dear mother, I have loved the name of Jesus since she taught it to me on her knee. That's a treasure, right?
It's a treasure.
The scriptures, since my dad helped me buy my first Bible and showed me how to read, I just love them. Well, I don't want to get rid of that. That's sharing the good news. I think I'm better at it now that I have good news.
Right.
But the impulse to do it, that came from my Baptist parents,
Part of the truth telling at the same time is to acknowledge the damage that it did.
Yeah.
Not as a value judgment against someone, because most people do damage without even having a clue.
Yeah,
that's what they do.
But
we're not trying to justify by looking for the beauty in these things.
Yes.
Where we are saying we've held on to passions and protected ourselves. It's almost like our identity got involved with the victimization we've experienced.
Right.
And so now we don't know how to let go of being a victim.
Right.
And
if I'm not a victim, who am I? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, that's part of the journey.
Yeah. Okay. But I couldn't get to the treasure without doing the fearless moral inventory, of and even how I was, and even how I was still a fundamentalist in my rage against fundamentalism. I'd switch sides without changing spirits. And so now what and you see this also in the ideological wars, right? People who've moved from the right to the left or vice versa, but they're still like cruel or something.
Right, exactly.
So that needs a journey.
That's that moral outrage, right? It's just in a different thing. I mean,
Richard,
go ahead.
Sorry, no, finish. I'll come back to remind me Richard Rohr's little statement.
So I was just saying, I was not brought up in a Christian home. I was brought up in an academic home. And I learned early on there was sexual abuse and what have you. And I learned very early on that the name of the game was performance. So at age 7, I said, if that's my value, this wasn't conscious. I said, I'm going to do the hardest thing I can think of. And in my little 7-year-old brain, I'll be a doctor. And so I made a vow, become a doctor, which I did, an MD, did it all the hoops and bells and whistles and Ivy League and until I crashed. Because I started having flashbacks and of all that horrific thing. And so I had to start to piece together my journey. Now I was able to hold it together, quote unquote. I was a really good doctor. I was just a basket case in my personal life and had to go through that process. And interestingly, as had to come to terms with my own abuse, the compassion of God in that encounter, because I'd had encounters with God as an early child. I was not raised as a Christian. I just knew this. I didn't know it was Jesus, but this man would come to comfort and keep me from insanity. And the only thing I knew is that he loved me and I loved him. That's the only thing I knew. And when we started traveling and I saw the crucifix, like on bed, we were in Spain, and and I said, that's the man. Didn't know the gospel, didn't know anything. As I began to walk things out in my rage, because family spiraled out, everything I cared about spiraled out. I turned my back on God. Not that I had been following him in a Christian way, but just at what I'd known of him. And I thought, if you're so good and you're so powerful, how can you let everything I care about just be decimated? And so I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And just made, at that particular time, the idol was medicine. So I did that until I started spinning out. And in the spin out was really interesting because as I started, I realized I finally reached a point where I couldn't handle it anymore, right? I couldn't barrel my way through. Like that was my, point. And so as the Lord started ministering to me, I saw his heart in the areas of abuse. And as that began to be shored up, and then I started to bear witness to his heart for my abuser, which you don't get that right. You don't get that right away until you know his heart for you. You can't handle it. But was able to walk through that. And as I continued the healing process, was able to go back and find the gold in those pits of hell that was available. And it's a process that we go through, and God is and he knows exactly what we need. And then later on, I started, I turned to Christianity, quote unquote, awakened up to Christ in me, the hope of glory. And then kind of fell into the religious trap and the performance trap in ministry. Yay. So you just change your idols. And God had me on a shelf for so long because he was like, honey, until you figure out who you are, we're just gonna keep you here. It's okay. Yeah, until you can just settle down and learn not to strive, learn to live in the grace of one day. So, it's just such a beautiful, I just love hearing these stories because we all come from, there's similarities, there's differences, but they're encounters with the person who is loved, that is bigger than whatever pit it is. And it's beautiful. So love it.
We don't actually change our idols. We just change the name on the idol.
Yeah.
Yes, we give it a new label. Yes, absolutely. So yeah. So what are kind of the takeaways that you're wanting people, I know it's not a teaching session, but there's things to glean from the book on a heart resonating level that you're wanting
to repeat what Paul had said earlier, the two that do jump out to me is there is no one who's irredeemable and there's no one who's unhealable. So we both have direct experience with both predators and victims. Mm-hmm. And we have seen sometimes the same person, like the pastor.
I don't think there's a predator without being a victim, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so you discover how it's we can at least conceive of Christ coming to the predator when he was a child, and what would that do? How would that change things? And how about if he comes to that child now?
Right.
So I do see in moral outrage and judgment, that's a real diminishing of the power of the cross. And I don't buy it. You know, there is nothing, I'm going to use Christianese here. There is nothing his blood can't wash. And by blood, by his blood, what I mean is the self-giving, radically forgiving, other-centered love of God revealed on the cross. There's nobody, there's no sin. I just find people who they think I'm just too bad. I'm like, do you realize what you're saying about Jesus? That and that, well, that's too easy. It's like, really, tell him that. Tell him how easy Gethsemane was. Tell him how easy it was carrying the cross up the, tell him, and you're going to tell me your little sins outdid that? It's like this guy I know. He's a sex addict. He had been through 5 marriages. And then he has people, and now he's been sexually sober for like, 15, 20 years. Mm-hmm. But he'll have someone come to him and they're just so full of shame. It's like, oh, I masturbated. And he's just like, oh, I've been through 5 marriages. You think I'm supposed to flinch?
Keep going, right?
Not that. Anything but that.
Right.
And I think we do that with Jesus. It's like, I'm too bad. It's like, you're not too bad. In fact, let us show you somebody who's worse than you. Exactly. And then just maybe you can receive forgiveness too.
That's the value of that. That's the value of sharing your stories where we've been these horrible places, acted in personas that are not ours, so that when we act in the ways of our being are not true to the truth of our being, right? When we're acting out in that, we do horrible things. We do sinful things, and that hurt people. We violate love in ourselves and other people. And so it's a level playing ground. I mean, we are all candidates to be saved. And so, I mean, that's just what we need. So Paul, you were going to talk about Richard Rohr for a second. And
this goes back a ways in our conversation. And it just takes this whole moral outrage as a confession thing out of the religious context. And he talks about the mean greens, those who have moved now into the woke ecological awareness of the planet and how mean they can be. They're supposedly moving into higher consciousness, but they're gonna look at you when you eat a piece of meat. They're gonna look at you and and it's just like that moral outrage. They think that their freedom has now given them a right to judge, instead of the movement toward true consciousness is a movement in the direction of the nature and character of God, who is love and only love.
You were so preaching my message. So I love that. And I actually those were my people. So just so you know, that's where I came from, ultra liberal. But I knew legalism, like I breathed it. Condemnation and shame and all that stuff was just the atmosphere and the skin I wore. And so really familiar with that. So I have a very low tolerance for the condemnation piece. It's just not happening in my world. So for me personally, but when I see it on someone else, like, oh, no, let's back up a little bit with that. So, and I do feel, when you've come out of it, you can just sniff it out, right? And there's just such a low, not that you're intolerant of the person, but that struggle and that hell of that shame and condemnation. It's like, oh no, we just need to do something about this. And God is just the one to help you get there from here. So I appreciate that. So anyway, keep on going. What else do you want to share? Yeah.
I was just saying that, we can turn our movement toward freedom into a job description and a ministry so fast. And then we can couch our moral outrage in something that becomes weaponized and justifiable because we know all the lingo, and it's like, no, there has to be true transformation.
Yeah, there's a song by a guy who he really doesn't like Christians, but it's pretty amazing. It's 15 minutes of shame, he says, and he talks about how we've weaponized shame, and that he's like, okay, yeah, pick up your pitchforks and let's go out there, but watch it, because if you trip, if you stumble, your own tribe will lynch you, you know. And I've seen that again and again.
Yeah.
And
We've got issues. Yeah.
yeah. So weaponizing shame now has become very, very woke. And
Oh my God.
my God, which
Really.
is a counterfeit awakening, isn't it? I mean,
It is.
there's a real awakening that can happen, but when the manifestation is cruelty, then you've lost the plot.
Right. Well, you're
As
looking
much
at
as
the
any.
fruit, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
As much as any, right-wing fundamentalist pastor,
Right.
we are prone to lose the plot.
And religious systems are also, they cover up truth. They have a tendency to cover up truth. They tend to deny story. And so nobody knows that they can come to wholeness. This is why I think the Holy Spirit raised up 12-step programs, because the community of faith needed some lessons about authenticity and face-to-face relationships.
Right.
And but in the world I grew up, I was only aware of my own sin
Mhm. And you thought you were the only one, right? So
all
yeah.
the time. And because nobody had the freedom. If they told a story, it was about way back then when they were, but
They
they're
weren't
okay
saved.
now.
We're all
And
good now. Yeah.
yeah, we're all
Yes.
good. And so, part of writing a book like The Pastor is to tell the truth, right? Just to tell the truth. And
Right.
and
What
the
a
beautiful
concept.
thing is that when people read the truth, lights will go on inside of them that you had not anticipated, simply because for a lot of people it's like, you too, me too, we too, we're
Exactly. The Me Too movement, right? So yeah.
yeah, just
Wow.
saying like, oh, and it gives people a voice. It gives them even the idea that these things can happen, like the healing journey and the healing process.
Yeah, that we don't have to be forever stuck. I do run into this a fair bit. It's like, you don't know what I've been through. What I've been through can never change, can never be healed. God could heal, but he can't. Like, yeah, he can. I really believe.
You really can.
I have a friend
Well,
who was
We
visiting
say
a
it over and
gal.
over. So yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have a friend who was visiting a young gal in a psych ward. Actually, he was a pastor doing visitation in a psych ward, and she had everything together, and then absolutely meltdown, blew up, and she ended up in the psych ward. And he sat there and listened to her story as she unfolded it, and he said, "I have never heard anything like this." And I didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what kind of response to have. And he said, I went home and I was praying about this and saying, God, I'm going to go back and see her. What do I say to her? And he got what he felt was some direction from that conversation. So he goes back and he sits down with her, and he says to her, so in light of everything that you've told me, do you think it would be helpful if I could bring you someone who's been through what you've been through and emerged through and into the other side of it? And she said, absolutely. And he said, I don't know anybody like that. Would you be willing to be that for someone else?
oh,
I know.
Beautiful.
And
Wow.
it was a switch that turned for her, that allowed her to then move. And it moved her in the direction of not just consumed by the center of herself, but also now beginning to care for someone else who
Wow.
has been through
Wow.
horrible loss. And that's what she did. She became
That's incredible.
that person for other people.
Oh, that is so great. Yeah, I remember there were times for me in my process, and I don't, let's be very clear, it's not like I'm finished. So when I say that, just you kind of reach a
We
level.
all would say the same thing.
Yes, okay. So I just want to,
A lot of finished work still.
yeah, exactly. But in my process, I couldn't do it, for myself. I couldn't do it for my kids, but I could do it for Jesus. And so for him, just his passion and his heart, I could do it. And I feel like Holy Spirit knows what that is outside of yourself that you can do it for.
That's interesting, because I never got there. I got to the place where the only person I could do this for was myself. And that is to walk through the fire. And it had, you know what? I didn't have what it took to do it for anybody else. I didn't have what it took to try to save my marriage. That's not why I did it. I didn't do it in order to do the right thing for God. I didn't do it. I did it because it was either find a way to change or die.
Yeah.
And it was that visceral for me. And, and I,
yeah, I just want to be clear, when I said I did it for God, it wasn't because I was trying to do it because it was the right, it was because I knew his heart, and it was that relationship with me. Because I'd had those encounters usually after the abuse, when you're thrown away and discarded, right? When little child mind is on the verge of insanity, and he showed up in those places. So that was so visceral for me that I couldn't even relate to myself. I don't know if that makes
so you
sense.
did it
Makes sense.
in the sense of out of the relationship of encounter.
Out of it. Yeah. Like, it wasn't a performance thing. It was just this visceral thing. I can do it for you because I know you.
So Catherine, I have a couple of questions for you. So,
Okay.
I'll tell you both questions and you can answer it how you want. So my first question is, like, that encounter as a little girl, like, it was so you're having tell us about meeting him in that place. And then the second is how you experienced the book in light of your experience.
Okay. Wow. So probably one of my earliest memories, and this has been buried so much. When you whatever you bury kind of haunts you, but you're running so fast that you're trying to outrun it. And it's really helpful if you do something like medicine, which, it'll just, or ministry or whatever will keep you so busy that
allows you to disassociate.
Yes, exactly. But that was just one of my coping mechanisms among many others. But I remember, and I think this particular one, it was I believe the abuse happened like really toddler. But this particular one that I remember, thank you, Paul. So I'm 4 years old, I'm in my closet, and I can literally feel kind of this, like a bomb went off in my soul. And I can, like, I just have no capacity to deal with it, the betrayal and all that. And I remember just sitting there feeling like I was just going to, like, I was dying inside and exploding at the same time. I don't know how to describe it. But of course, you're a little 4-year-old, so you have less capacity. And I just remember Jesus showing up. And I tell you, I didn't touch him and feel solid. I just knew he was there. And he was so gentle in his presence, because he knew in that extreme, I'm alone and I have nowhere to go, that I just needed someone there. But if he tried to reach out to me or hold me, it probably would have freaked me out too much, right? I couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
But it was his there-ness. And
that
then go ahead.
Just to interrupt, sorry. I mean, you're totally describing Isaiah 42:2, where it says, a bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. And the idea there is you've got a wick of a candle, the flame's gone out, and you've just got the little orange glow. Imagine the supernatural tenderness it would take to blow on that and bring it back to flame rather than snuffing it out. You're describing that in the psyche of a 4-year-old girl. I mean, that's incredible.
Exactly.
All right,
It
back.
is incredible.
Carry on.
And I just knew, he loved me enough in that gentle presence that allowed me not to go insane. That he loved me. And so whatever was left of my heart that was created to love was able to respond, even if it was a little flicker. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
I just believe he kept me together enough. And then there were other encounters, even if they weren't like sexual abuse. I remember one time when I was a kindergartner, and my dad was teaching at the University of Rabat, so we were living in Morocco. And so I was kindergartner. I'm finger painting in kindergarten class, and there's this girl that I'm just finger painting away. I'm actually happy, okay. And she looked at me, and I remember this, it was an existential hatred. It was the most bizarre thing. Like I'd done nothing, I'm finger painting. And she literally like flew across the table. It was really bizarre. Grabbed my cheek, wrenched the crap out of it, right? So I have this big welt, and I've learned by this time that, well, you just learn you have no voice. So, and you don't really cry, although you're devastated. I just remember the pain of it and like, why do you hate me so much? And I remember, so I didn't tell the teacher because I'd learned you just like, it didn't come into my being that you would actually go to someone and tell them about your pain. So I remember going out in the field in recess, and once again, that existential, I'm alone, I'm in pain, and Jesus shows up again. I'm here for you. And he led me, we just had this time in the sunshine with the little butterflies. And that's what my little psyche could handle at that point. And then as we started traveling around Europe, that's when I said, that's the man. That's the man. See, I remember I used to sneak read my Bible, because in my world, if you read your Bible, that was shameful, because the message was those Christians, were weak, and they needed this, I don't know what, they needed this, figment of your imagination, this crutch. Yeah. And so I would sneak read, and then I'd feel ashamed for reading my Bible. So it was really jacked up. But I did carry that. And then later on, as I continued to grow, became more sophisticated, and just bitterness kind of came up. I rejected that, but it's amazing. You run from God. Well, where are you going to go? Because he's everywhere. So love is just outstepping. I have a chapter in my book. I have a book called Marked by Love, and it's called Annoying Relentless Love, because everywhere I went, it was Jesus.
That's great.
Leave me alone. It's like, oh, honey, I'm just right here. I'm right here whenever you're ready. It's like, I can't hear you, right? But there came a time when my salvation experience, I was on call in the ICU. And so I just made my rounds, and I had been, I'd been having all these flashbacks and these demonic manifestations and all this kind of stuff. And I just knew Holy Spirit was just like wooing and pursuing and wooing and annoying, relentless love. And so I go into the residence room, I'm by myself, and I'm like, okay, God, I'm going to do you a big favor. You can have me, and God is like, yay, and we'll deal with the pride issue later. That's awesome. And so he's so gracious, and you just fall in love with him because he's so good.
And it wasn't a pride issue.
Oh, yeah,
no, it wasn't. It was a shame issue. And yeah. And because at that point, you didn't have a sense enough of self to be proudful about it.
Right.
And so and that what you did was a surrender. And every incremental point of surrender, it's a rush-in moment for, the love of God. And it's very responsive in that sense. Thanks for sharing that. Those are
For sure.
hard things and tender things, and you know, that mirrors the authenticity of what we were trying to do in the pastor. I was thinking of Sage's comment when the pastor, it's not Sage, it's the doctor, it's Dr. Hope, yeah.
Yeah.
I
When
love
he
the
says,
names you chose. So good.
yeah,
Yes.
he
Okay,
says,
Dr. Hope.
why don't you just fix me, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And she says, I'm going as fast as you're able. Right. And we can look back at our lives and go like, yep, the timing was meticulous,
Truly.
you know, and the
It's masterful.
kindness of God was to not move faster than I was able. But it felt like the end of my rope sometimes anyway. But I can look back and say, wow, it was as fast as I was able. No condemnation in that.
Right. Right. Yeah, he's so masterful and knows exactly that. That's why every time I'm kind of at an impasse, either with myself or, you know, with a client or whatever, it's like I have no clue what to do. But God's not stymied or baffled. So, right. So we can just lean in on whatever he's doing and just join in that if, and I love one of the things you said in the book too. It was also an offer, like he doesn't it doesn't coerce, doesn't, right? So he just asks, are you willing? Are you willing? Are you willing? Okay, you're not willing yet. Okay, we won't do that yet. You know, so he's not going to be one of your abusers to try to fix you.
Correct.
Because you're broken. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. He has so much value for our personhood and, you know, so much value for our humanity that if we are wanting to hold on to our brokenness, he's going to honor that. And but he will woo you. He's also very sneaky. It's like Jehovah's sneaky. He's very masterful. It's like, okay, so this way's not working, so I'm just going to woo your heart this way. It's incredible. And you know, you would ask me, Bradley, about how the book affected me. Well, one of the things I like to take advantage of any upgrade through whatever venue, because, you know, as I said, I'm a work in progress. I mean, we're good. We're finishing work, right? So it's a little different from having to deconstruct massively to reconstruct. But so I actually, as we were going through the different kind of prayers and things like that, I would just pause and let the Lord bring some stuff up. And he absolutely did. Of course he did. And just minister to some of those things. There were some insecurities and things that the Lord was like, oh, we're going to deal with that. So that's good. And, you know, I was operating on a conscious level. I just was, well, like, I'm assuming there's crap in there, but you don't always know your crap until it kind of comes up, until it's time for it to be dealt with and you get triggered or whatever that is. So I just let the trigger come up. Oh yeah, that's a deal. And so, right. And then just let Holy Spirit walk through the very process that I was walking through the pastor. And that's that place of humility that, you know, you let love burn out whatever's not of love's kind, as you say. I love that so much. You know, and just look at it and you know, you're not justifying, you're not rationalizing, you're just looking at it in the ugly version of what that is, knowing that you're just going to help me pass this. And I can trust you in that. And that's the beautiful thing when you start to have that track record with the Lord. It's like, well, you brought me through this and this ugly thing. Yeah, we'll do this. And it doesn't feel good, but you know, there's another side. Yeah. That is so redemptive, you know, and anyway, so that's kind of, so I let him deal with some insecurities that I was, you know, I mean, I've done a lot of work, which I needed. Just thank you, Jesus. I needed it. So, but there's always more. And so there's always more finishing. And then sometimes it's not even an issue of brokenness per se. It's an issue too of our limitations and how we're not, like, the Lord wants to do this. And you're like, well, I don't know how to write a book and do a film and, you know, all these, you know, but he's saying, well, I do. And so, right. And so you're bringing him up, and, it's the manifestation of the sons and daughters of God, right? So he's able to bring that out. So yeah, so I was totally taking advantage of it. And there were some real pain points that came up that, like, okay, yeah, okay, let's go there. But it's
Good for you.
great. Yeah. When you're used to doing that, you get through it quicker because you yield faster.
Yes,
So,
that's it. Yielding, right?
Yeah.
Things to do, yield.
Yes. My to-do list. Absolutely. Well, we're kind of at the top of the hour, and I don't want to hog all your time. Particular closing insights, protests.
No, just grateful that you had us, and
I am
that
too.
you could share, and especially for your story. That was a
Incredible.
highlight of my day.
Yep,
Oh
me
my
too.
goodness. Wow. I'm really honored. Thank you. Well, and you guys, I love you so much. I'm grateful,
Love you
grateful,
too.
grateful. Everybody get a copy of the book and let it minister to you. Holy Spirit will definitely do that. Can you flash up your copy, which is a better copy than mine? Really awesome. And they can get that where?
So they can get an autograph copy at Premier with an E on the end, premiercollectibles.com/pastor, or it's
Same
on
price.
Amazon.
Same price.
Same price and then first edition and signed, whatever. But
Lovely.
on Amazon, it's you can get the hard copy or Kindle, but we really recommend that full audio immersion. It's cheaper and better probably. And then if you have listeners in Canada, they need to go to houseofjames.com to get the hard copy, but they can get audio at Audible or Amazon as well.
Love that. Can you send me those links and I'll put them in the...
Will do.
So yeah, that would be really great. Well, thank you so much. And everybody make sure you check out that book and follow up with Paul and Bradley for all of the amazing things they're doing. And you have a delightful evening.